All right, guys, it's the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar. I appreciate you guys being here with me today. Today's webinar is the importance of iteration management for batch processing. And why is this important to you? So first, let's go ahead and get through a couple housekeeping items. My name is Robin Kamucheka. I'm a technical application specialist at Denovo Software. If you have any questions at any time during this webinar, please feel free to enter them here in the questions box in your GoToWebinar dialog. Also, my colleague Kaya Ghosh is here with me to answer your questions, so she'll be responding to questions as I'm presenting. And I just want to welcome you again to the webinar and thank you for your attendance. So let's talk about our batch processing. Batch processing in FCS Express is a little different than in other softwares. Batch processing in FCS Express takes your data analysis strategy, applies it to your data files, goes through your batch actions, which are options and actions that you select for your output files to get presentation ready and presentation quality files, PDFs, PowerPoints, Excel, and etc. So what we do here with batch processing is we start with our data analysis strategy. We make sure that our iterations have integrity, meaning that they're active and available to be used. We set up our batch actions and options. Then we run our batch processing to generate those output files that I was speaking of, the PDFs, the PowerPoints, the Excels. Once we start that process of batch processing, it moves through each iteration completely automated. And that is how we can create reproducible and reliable data output files and results from our analysis. So now that we have a little bit of an introduction, let's go over the topics that we'll be covering in today's webinar. In today's webinar, we'll be going over the following topics. We'll be defining what an iteration is. We'll be incorporating panels to redefine the number of data files in an iteration. We'll be determining if an iteration is active. We'll also be reviewing how iterations are deactivated. With that, we'll explore tools on how to restore our iterations. Then we'll go through some batch process options, and then we'll run a batch process as well. So some of these, there's no order, so some of these will be integrated with each other, but we will cover all of these topics as we go through this webinar. So let's start here. This is my data analysis strategy, right? We've all done that, created our plots, introduced our gates here, some markers, some quadrants. We've got a text box here that gives us some information about our data. We have a histogram. Then we have a comparative histogram here with two different populations. We have the CD3 positive and the CD3 negative population on the same histogram as defined. And then we're looking at this CD1656 parameter. So we've set that up, and that's great. So let's take a look at what an iteration is. So right now you can see I have iterations here, and under these iterations you can see that all of these iterations are blue, which is what you want to see. That means all my iterations are active. And what an iteration is in FCS Express is essentially a data file. Whenever you bring data files into FCS Express, each individual data file is looked at as a single iteration. And so that's great, right? We've got everything active and everything's going well so far in our analysis. But what happens if I accidentally take this file and drag it over here? Okay, we're going to replace the existing overlay on the plot. And then suddenly you can see I have deactivated some of my iterations. So 11 through 18 now are unable to be batch processed. So, okay, that could be a problem, right? I could have done that accidentally, and then I'm moving through the rest of my layout and I'm not sure what happened, right? And I'm not paying attention. I didn't see in the header here that this file is labeled, this has a different label here. So what can I do? My favorite tool to discover what's going on in my analysis is the Data Navigator. This essentially tells you how you're using data throughout your layout. So when we have data files that are single and being used as one single iteration, there should only be one data file listed here. If there's multiple data files here, you can see where they're located. And I had closed those earlier. But see, so my initial data file, this top one, is used on all these plots, but then only this histogram is used for this data file. So great, right? But this tool gets even better. If I select this, it highlights the plot, so I know exactly which plot I need to go to fix my iterations. So then I can come over here to my data list, grab that first file, drag it back onto that histogram, replace the existing overlays on the plot, and just like that, I've restored my iterations, and then you can see that that data file has also disappeared from my Data Navigator. So I'm going to go ahead and um, bring that back to the tab to the side and get back to our data list here. So that's great, right? We're doing the single data analysis, but what happens when we need to do comparative analysis, maybe immunophenotyping, or we just want to compare control and treatment samples? Well, we have this great tool in FCS Express called panels, and this is a way to organize your data. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to kind of go back down to this data section here where I have the controls and treatments. And now I'm going to create a panel. So you can see you can create a panel from here, the data tab. There's also this space down here where you can create a panel just down at the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And then additionally, you have the option to create panels when you're accessing your batch tab. So panels can be really important. They could be necessary for a lot of different things. So let's show you how to add that now. So I clicked on the panel tab from the bottom, and here it opens my panel information. So all I want to do here is add a panel, and I'm going to call it control versus, let me clean that up a little, control versus treatment. And now here I can designate how many tubes. So if you look at my data list, I have a control 1, and then I have 2 treatments, treatment A and treatment B. So I'm going to add 3 data files here. Now, I highly recommend you use this to input some labels so that when you go back and apply this panel, you know which order the tubes need to be in. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So I'm going to click OK. You'll see that this panel is now under the available panels. It's checked, which means it's marked active. I click OK, and now my panel has been applied. And you can see now that my iterations are created with 3 tubes. So 3 data files now make 1 iteration, which is a great feature. And so right now we're working with iteration 4. And so I have just 1 sample showing on everything right now. But what I can do, because I've changed how I'm using my iterations, is I can drag treatment A to the treatment A slot and treatment B to the treatment B plot. And then you can see that everything has updated for me. And my iterations are still active because I made them into three data files per 1 iteration. And if I move a given gate, you can see that my pie chart upgrades with the granulocytes. And then if I move my monocytes gate here, you will see that my bar chart also updates. Great. So now what happens if we come into our template and maybe today I don't have enough, I don't have 18 files. What can I do? So what I'm going to do here is just delete one of these files quickly. And now you see that iteration 6 is no longer active. Well, we have a great feature for that to cover that. All we have to do here is add a blank tube. Now, when I add that blank tube, I can still process my data files through that analysis template, and I don't have to worry about recreating something for an incomplete data set. So let's just go undo that twice, bring that data file back in, and now I'm just going to go to the next data file so you can see the differences between these data sets. That's 5. And that's 6. Okay, and that's how we would use panels to optimize how we're using our iterations. So to deactivate a panel, you can do 2 things. You can delete it outright, or you can just uncheck it, click OK, and then it will no longer be applied. Now, because I do still have those two files outstanding on my plot, you can see that my iteration number again is interrupted. So 17 and 18 are deactivated. So what I'm going to do is just come back to my first data file, and I'm going to select to change all overlays and all objects to selected file and click OK. And then all my iterations are restored. And again, my other tool that I could have used if I wasn't sure what was happening is this Data Navigator, where I would see what files were being shown here in my layout. So now another common thing that we do are histogram overlays, and that can cause a little bit of a issue with your iteration if you're not careful. So right now I only have this single histogram, but I want to do some comparison and I want to do some overlays with these additional data files. So I'm just going to go ahead and select a couple more data files here, drag them over onto my plot, add the files to the plot as new overlays and click OK. And now you can see it is updated with those new data files. But again, what has happened is my iteration number has changed, right? There's some that are deactivated. I now only have 14 active iterations. So if I come to my Data Navigator, I can again see that I have multiple files here, and I can look and see where they're being used. So, right, we know this first file is predominantly everything in the layout, and then these extra files that we just added to the histogram are on this histogram. So what can we do? So we have a couple options. Sometimes it's part of our analysis, right? We need this element here, so we can make this a static element. And what I mean by a static element is that it's still integrated with our analysis, but it won't change with our batch processing. And that can be found under overlays. So what I do is I start with my first overlay. I come down and I uncheck the box, and I just move through this overlay list, unchecking these boxes. And as I get to the end of this list and all of these are unchecked, you will see that my iteration number or iteration activity of all my iterations will be restored. And there you go. So now this element is like a static element. When I move to the next data file, it won't change. It'll be exactly the same. So it doesn't matter which data file I go to, this stays just the same. But if I were to go to my, let's take this to a 2-page view here. If I were to go to my Limpscape and change that, oops, just get this on the right page here. There we go. If I come here to my Limpscape and change that, you can see that my plot is still updated. So it's still linked to the gates, and it will still update with the gates, but it just won't go through the data files in the batching process. So let's go ahead and return to a single page. And so now that's one way to deal with this, and we'll just leave this as a stationary element. And all of our iterations are active. So let's go ahead and move on to another analysis tool that I've seen a lot. So here we have this plot, and I want to make sure that these quadrants are appropriate for all my data files. I'm not quite sure, so I want to kind of do some balancing and just have a look-see and see if this, this is going to work for the rest of my data. So what I can do is select that plot, come to my Home tab, and use multiple duplicate and next. When I do that, I can select how many I want. I'm just going to select the first few data files here because I don't think we need to see all of these. So we'll do 8. We'll place them in a grid. Now, if you wanted to place them in a grid, that's telling the software how to place them. So right now we have 4 columns by 4 rows, horizontal, auto spacing in between. That looks good. We'll click OK. Click OK again. And then the plots will come up onto this layout. And see, I've generated all these plots. I can look across my data files and see, okay, yep, this looks okay. Now, If I wanted to keep this for whatever reason for my part of my analysis, there is a way we can do that. I can do a Control A to select all my plots. Again, go to the overlays and uncheck this box. And I will reactivate all of these data files that are currently deactivated. And then I can have this element as part of my layout. But FCS Express also has a way that this can be produced as an output file. So for this, I want to show you that when I run through our batch processing. So we're going to do a couple undos here and get rid of these multiple plots. And there we go. So now we're back to restored. We have the single plot here, and we have all of our iteration files active. Okay, so now let's go ahead to move on to our analysis and spreadsheets. So iterations, again, the management of iterations is really quite simple. You just need to make sure that you are using your tools in FCS Express to make sure you know which data files are being used where and how you're using them. If you deselect the graph or plot from the batch process, then you can manage your iteration that way as well. But there are other tools and other ways to manage your data here. So if we go to our Tools tab, we can apply some iteration snapshots. And what this does is it takes a picture or a snapshot of each data file as you make changes. So we're going to leave this first iteration as it is, and we're going to go ahead and move to the second data file. And you can always tell which iteration is being used because it is highlighted in that light blue. So now we're on the second data file or second iteration. I'm going to make some just kind of large changes so that when we go between the iterations, you can see the differences here. So maybe not structurally sound gating, but just so that you can see the changes and see how the iteration snapshots works. Okay, so that's for file 2. Then we'll go ahead and move for file 3. And we'll do some awesome regating here too. If it will let me select that gate. There we go. There we go. And so now we've made some changes to each iteration individually. And when I go back to through those data files, the software will remember where those gates were placed. So that was iteration 2, and that's iteration 1. Now this is a great tool for markers and quadrants because markers and quadrants are a little different in FCS Express. They're not automatically gates, and even if they're converted to gates, you can't create them into a data-specific gate. So this is a way to do that using snapshots. So it can be a really great tool to manage your data files and to manage how you're running your analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off our iterations snapshots, and it'll give me this message, turning off the apply iteration snapshots, so it'll record iterations, but it won't apply them. So we click yes, we'd like to proceed. And now when I come back to my data tab, when I move to the next iteration, my gates are maintained as they are for the first file. So all those applied snapshots are now gone. Okay, so another tool that we like to use when we're doing our data analysis is the spreadsheet. When we're in we're using our panel plot, you could see that we had a spreadsheet down here, and this spreadsheet is connected to the plots that are presented here. And so when I move to next data files, you will see that it updates accordingly with each data file. But what if I wanted to do a larger or a summary spreadsheet. I want to bring all these data files into this spreadsheet, and I want to just have a one-time thing, right? Well, a lot of times when we grab from the data list here, we drag it in, and I'm just going to do a keyword token here. And if you don't know the keyword, you can use this ellipsis here and scroll through your list and find the keyword that you're looking for. But if you know it, you can also type it into that text box that was there. So I'm just going to go ahead and select it from that list. Click OK. And then it will take a moment for this to upload. And there it is. So now this is populated. But you can see as I've populated that spreadsheet with those multiple data files, I've also deactivated some of my data files. And if I come over here to my Data Navigator, I can kind of figure out what's happening. Let's see. So I've got histograms here. Let's look at our stats panel. And you can see in spreadsheets here, and just all the places that our data files are currently being used. Let's go ahead and close that back. Now there is a workaround for this. What we're going to do is a quick undo here to take those keywords out. And then you can see that my iteration number has been reactivated. I can select those same data files, drag them in here. We'll do the keyword token again. And now when I get to this window, I can move to my data source and unselect this allow the data file of this token to change when running next, previous, or batch processing. And again, what this does is it makes it a static element, so it won't change when I move between iteration. Oh, let's correct that. So I've unchecked this box here. Let me just enter my keyword. Click OK. And now it's updated with the exact same information from those data files, but this time I haven't deactivated my iterations here. So all my iterations are still active. So we'll do sample here. And that time I just added one element, but let me just go ahead and add a couple different things here. And this time we'll add some statistic tokens. So we'll use the forward scatter parameter. We'll grab the limps. And we'll do number of events and percent of all cells. There we go, perfect. And then after a moment here, this spreadsheet will be updated with this information from these data files. And as it's updated, you can see again, I didn't go to that data source key. So again, I have deactivated accidentally some of my iterations. So what I'm going to do is just do a simple undo, and it'll clear out all the information that was just added. I'm going to re-grab those data files, draw them into my spreadsheet, go to my data source tab, unclick allow the data file to be changed, grab the same elements that I just had previously, click OK. And this time, when it updates in my spreadsheet, I will have conserved the integrity of my iterations. So you see that they're all blue, they're all active, and that the information here has been updated in my spreadsheet. Everything that I selected has now been brought here. So even though, again, this is an element that's not going to change when I go to the next data file, it's still very interactive. And so again, if I go to that first analysis page and do a 2x2 view, let me just do a 2-page view here. Let me bring that to the side so that we have a little more space to work with. So we'll keep my spreadsheet here on the left and the analysis plots here on my right. And if I move this lymph gate, you will see that my spreadsheet and all my other plots are still updating in real time. Just adjust that gate back a little. And this is an important thing to remember. So even though it's not actively going to be patched, it will still be integrated and update with whatever changes that you make within a layout. And now I seem to be fighting a little bit with this gate. My apologies. Let me try to restore that real quick. There we go. And awesome. So now let's just go back to that one-page view. We have this lovely summary table here in our analysis. All of our data files are active. We don't have anything that's grayed out. So let's go ahead now and start looking at batch processing, right? Because that's the purpose of our iterations. It's really the foundational element to batch processing. So we've got all these elements that we wanted to conserve in our layout, spreadsheet, a summary spreadsheet. We have a histogram here with overlays. And now let me just show you some things that we can do. I'm going to come back to our analysis plots here. So I've already set up some batch actions for us. We have an Excel sheet that's going to export some of these statistics for us. I have a PowerPoint. And with this PowerPoint, what I've done is I've just selected it for to be page 3. So those other pages that I have won't be part of this batch process. So if you didn't want to use your entire layout, you do have the option of using all pages, a current page, or selecting pages. And now we spoke briefly about this multiple plots page here. And I want to show you, because this is directly related to my batch action of exporting to a PDF. So what I've done here is I've selected the appropriate page, and it's the 6th page in this layout. And then from my export options, and usually you have full page here selected, but if you scroll down to the bottom here, you have a custom grid option. And if you wanted to see how that custom grid was going to look, you do have the option to click on this ellipsis button, and this custom grid will open. So it kind of gives you the same options that we had when we opened up the multiple duplicate and next. And so you can designate how many columns, how many rows, and what you want that to look like. That will be fine for our case here. And then I also have crop to content. So it will just crop this picture here. And then I have combined the output from all iterations into a single file. So again, it will create that same page format that we saw before when we did the duplicate and next. And click OK. So that's great. Those are just our batch actions. But since we're focused on iterations today, let's talk a little bit more about our batch options, because this is a place that we can, again, really focus on iteration management. So when we come into this batch processing options, we can select how many iterations we want to perform. So I want to just do the top 9 files, so I can select this top button, and this space I can designate how many files. 9 is already here, so we'll just leave that there. If I had left it at automatically, then it would just go through each data file that's present here in the data list. Now, an increment value here is also another way that you can go through your batch processing. So if I only wanted to do every second file or every third file, I could designate that here by changing my increment of, value. Now, if we come down here, we have some more iteration options. If I wasn't sure that my data analysis strategy was perfect for each iteration, I can unconditionally pause between iterations. And now what this will do in my data processing is after it does data file 1, it will stop with data file 2 present on my layout, and I'll be able to make changes if needed. And I'm going to check that so that I can actually demonstrate that in this webinar today. I can also check boxes here as you get down. I can pause on flagged iterations. And I don't know if I showed you that earlier, so let me just go back to my, close this really quickly and go to my data tab. So you do have this little flag here. If you have a data file that you suspect might be a little different than others, or you just wanted to take a second look at while you're doing your batch processing, you can go ahead and flag an iteration. And when I tap that flag, you see that I have a flag now here in my data list to the left of iteration number 2. And then if I deselect that, the flag will go away. So let's just go back to our batch options here and continue on. If I wanted to pause on a specific iteration or a bunch of different iterations, maybe the 5th, 10th, and 12th file, I can designate that here as well. And then after this is complete, after the batch processing is complete for a specific iteration, it asks if you would like to keep those changes. And you can select yes, or you can restore the layout depending on what your needs are for analysis. All right, so I haven't made any changes, so I don't need to select OK. I can just cancel out of my options. All my iterations are active. Now, this next part is just a little tip for managing your iterations while getting ready to do batch processing. I always come back to my data tab just to make sure that I'm starting on iteration 1. Because if I'm not starting on iteration 1, it will start the batch processing from whatever file is selected here. So, okay, so this is our analysis strategy here. I have my batch actions already um, depicted here in my actions list. And I'm going to go ahead now and just run, let me just dock this to the side here and give us a little more space. There we go. Now I'm just going to go ahead and run my batch process. So this is a message that says I already have iterations saved. Am I sure I want to run this batch process? It will clear of any snapshots. And I say yes. Now, so it's ran the batch process for my first data file. And remember, I had selected in my batch options for it to pause on each iteration. So now I'm on my second iteration and it stopped to give me a moment to take a look and see if I need to make any changes. If I don't need to make any changes, I can press just continue. If I didn't want to make any changes and I knew everything after this point was going to be fine, I could just go ahead and click to run to end. And for this webinar, I'm just going to go ahead and click that. So after it processes through and batches through these data files, the output files that I selected, the PDF, the PowerPoint, and the Excel will be generated for each of these data files. Now that's great, right? Because when I'm ready to present this data, all of this will already be generated for me. It's presentation ready, quality, data files, and it's just another way to really use the tools in FCS Express to get reliable and reproducible results. So my data files have actually opened on my other screen, so I'm going to drag them over here. And here is the Excel sheet that I asked FCS Express to make. These are the statistics that I exported here. And also I have the reporter token that I had inserted where it's saying whether my sample was acceptable or below range, and just the number of events and other statistical values that I decided to export here. Let me go ahead and minimize that. And now I can bring you over to the PowerPoint. we go. So PowerPoint looks almost exactly like FCS Express, so I know it can be hard to see the change here, but as I go down, you will see that I have that third page for each data file that was selected to be run for that batch processing. Each data file has its own page, so we'll just go through those quickly here. And then finally, I had made that PDF to have that grid format and export that one plot. And again, it looks just like it did when we generated this in FCS Express. I have the initial plot, and then I have each iteration that I assigned to run showing up in that grid format on a single page here as a PDF. Oops, I'll go ahead and minimize that as well. So now that we're back in our layout, I did want to take a moment and talk about some things that I forgot to tell you. So if I have these elements that are static elements or maybe one-time elements, I still can use these and still can generate data from this. I can just simply go, I've managed my iterations because it's not moving with my batching or moving to the next data file. But what I can do here is go to my File tab and simply select to export. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to export this current page as an image here. And I'm going to give it a quick name on the other side. Sorry, that window popped up over here. And we're going to say iteration histogram. And then here, if I wanted to change how this was going to be exported, I could pick whichever file I wanted. Do save. And then I'll open up that file so you can see what that image looks like. And there you go. And here is the image that we created just by using the export tool in FCS Express. So that's really one of the beautiful things about our batch processing. It's super flexible. We're able to determine which pages we're going to use in batch processing. And when we do have static elements, we can just use the export tool on those pages specifically. And so now I've gone through this, I've moved through this relatively well today. So I want to thank you for your attendance. And while I'm here, I'm going to look through the questions and see if there's anything that you want me to demonstrate or go over again, just so that you definitely get the information that you want from today's webinar. Okay, so Kay is doing an amazing job answering questions over here, but is there anything that anyone would like to have demonstrated? Just go ahead and throw that in the questions box, and I can go ahead and give you a quick demo. So while I'm waiting for that, let's go over a couple other things with our iterations here. We've done the panels, and we showed how to create panels. Let's go back here. I think I saw a question about the grid. So if I go here and go to home, when I do duplicate and next, I can customize my grid options, so I can change that if I wanted to change the number of columns and rows. The spacing I can change to a minimal or enter a manual value. I can change how they're ordered, so if I wanted to order them vertically as opposed to horizontally, I can do that as well. And I think I saw something about the axes changing. So if you don't fix your axes for a bi-exponential plot, it will change according to each data file, depending on which data file is being displayed. So that does occur sometimes, but you can fix the scaling if you would like. So let me see. How to check when samples gate has been changed during batching. Great. So if you have selected in your batch options to keep the changes that were made between iterations, when you go back, you can review any changes that were made. So let me just do a quick, we'll do a quick demo batch process of that. We'll run just 3 files here. Click OK. And I will deselect some of our batch actions as well, just to give you a quick demonstration of that. Make sure I'm paused on, unconditionally paused between iterations, okay. And let's go ahead and run that. Oh, let me give that another name. And we'll click yes. And it'll run this first iteration. Again, it'll pause when we get to iteration 2. So we'll just make some pretty drastic changes so that we can see the changes when we come back to review. Go. We'll move this to a different location as well. There we go. And I'll move this histogram marker down here as well. And then it'll continue on to the next. And again, pause on this last one to see if I wanted to make any other changes. And for this one, we'll just kind of move everything to the other side and just, oops, make some changes that way. Bring that over here. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to just randomize your movements. You would do that according to your data, but just for the example here, I'm just kind of making some big changes so that when we go back, you can see, really see those changes. There we go. And then we'll do continue. And here we have the PowerPoint. This was iteration 1 where we left our gating strategy B. This is iteration 2 where we made some changes to our gating. And then this is iteration 3. So this is in the PowerPoint that was exported. So let's go ahead and go back to our software. Now when we're back in the software, if we wanted to do a review, oops. Okay, let me continue that. It can show me where those gates were changed. So in any of your output files, you would be able to see what gates were changed as well. Let me go ahead and close this PowerPoint. There we go. I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. We are finishing just a little bit early, but I hope that this webinar was useful. Thank you for attending the importance of iteration management for batch processing. If you have any questions or need any additional support, please contact us at support@denovosoftware.com. If you need any additional resources, please visit our website at denovosoftware.com. There's webinars, there's video downloads. The webinars are, I guess, are anywhere from about 45 minutes to an hour. And then some of our videos are just a couple minutes on specific features so that you can really get the analysis tools or an understanding of the analysis tools that you want to use. I'll be on for just a couple more minutes and see if I can parse through any of these questions and see if there's anything else that I can answer for you live and give you a demonstration of. Okay, let me see. I see a question here. See if I can expand this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with this question. It says, what if the change is not obvious visually? So if you don't make big changes, that's okay too. The software will still track them, and then when you get your output files, you'll be able to see what changes you made. I know I made some big ones just because I wanted it to be very obvious in this webinar. Okay, say file 2 has some issues with the population selection, but the others are okay and similar to N1. How can I keep the first selection for the other files? So in FCS Express, let's just quickly go back to the analysis plots. So in FCS Express, the gates are universal, but one way to use that or to take care of that issue really is to make a data-specific gate. So you can do a couple different things here. Oops. I can grab a gate, and when I grab a gate, you'll see on my gating tab that this data-specific gate option is available. And I can select that, and then when I adjust this gate, it will only be for this data file. So when I go through the next data file, I won't have to worry about the gate. It'll be what it was before. So as you see, when I move to iteration 2, only that lymph population is selected, but when I go back to data file 1, it is changed and it is specific just for that data file. So that is one way to work with I guess, outliers of your data is just to make some data specific gates. And then of course, if you didn't want to go through the resizing, you can just come here and turn off the data specific gate and it will go back to the universal gate. I hope I answered your question. And let's see if I can get to a couple more questions here. Oops. Let's see. For a panel, each iteration had 3 files, 3 FCS files. How does it determine which FCS files belong to which iteration? FCS should go in iteration 1, 2, 3, or can we manually dictate? So these iteration numbers and the way that this data set is listed in this data file is completely malleable. So I can grab a data file here and move it up or move it down in my data list. The panel is just kind of giving a software of an idea of how I want how many data files I want in each iteration. So if I reactivate this and click OK, I can recreate those panels, but I don't necessarily need these files to be in this order. I can designate which files go where. Again, that's why I kind of said that labeling your 1, 2, and 3 within this iteration, like Control A and B, gives you a way to make sure that the correct data files get into the correct space. Okay, let me see if I can find any other questions here. Here's a good one. What causes some files in the data list to be grayed out after certain actions? It seemed random to me with the examples. Is it because those actions are not available for those files? Maybe because those markers were not used. No, so what happens, so if I just select, I'm going to go ahead and select this data file here and bring it on, drag it on to that histogram again. Just as an example, we're going to replace that, and then it'll gray out some of our iterations. So what happens is when the software sees that you have used separate different files in different locations, it tries to keep that pattern. So 1 and 9, 2 and 10, 3 and 11, et cetera, et cetera. But after we get to 10, there's not an option. So there's not 11 and 19 or 12 and 20 because there's 8 data files between the first iterate, or the one that we selected that's on the plots, and then this one. So it's not random, it's just the software tries to maintain that pattern as long as it can. And then when it gets to that first sample where there's not the second sample available to keep the pattern, those are the options that are grayed out or deactivated. So that's a great question. Thank you so much for answering that, or for asking that. Okay, let me see if I have any other questions that I can get to here. Okay, if we change something for file 2, how can we have the same situation for file 1 into file 3 and the following? So to have only file 2 modified. You can do that via the iteration snapshots, or you can also do that with the regular just snapshot tool. I didn't really get into that very much today, but for snapshots, it's literally just taking a snapshot of a data file, and then you can choose to apply that snapshot onto different and other data files. So that's one way to modify just one file and have that one file different from the rest. But of course, there's a lot of different variables there. So at any time, if anybody attending here would like to do a free one-on-one training with any of our staff, please just feel free to reach out at support@denovosoftware.com. We're readily available and happy to assist you and make sure that we are giving you the tools that you need to do your analysis. And sometimes that helps in a screen share. And I'm going to just look for maybe one more question here, one or two. There we go. Okay. I Okay, I did an amazing job answering your questions while I was going through the webinar. So if there isn't anything new, I'm going to go ahead and finish our webinar. Oh, there we go. Let's see. Think. Yep, nope. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for attending today's webinar. If you have any last minute questions, please get them in there. I will be here for just the next few minutes to make sure that you did get your full hour and that I can answer any questions live that you may have. Again, just feel free to ask any questions that you may have. I'd love to answer them for you. We're going to be here for just a couple more minutes. Okay, we're back at the top of the hour. I want to thank you again for attending today's webinar, The Importance of Iteration Management for Batch Processing. If you need to contact us for any reason, please feel free to reach out at support@denovosoftware.com. And if you need any resources or tools to help you get started in data analysis or to expand your data analysis, please reach out to us at denovosoftware.com. We've got great videos, we've got our manual, we've got tutorials, anything that you need. And then of course, our staff is always ready and available to meet with you to do some one-on-one training via a screen share. So please let us know how we can help you. Thank you again for attending today's webinar.